This is just the beginning.
Good afternoon, and welcome to our Axios virtual event, The Future of Work, Science of Organizational Change. I'm Erica Pandy. I'm a business reporter here at Axios, and I'm coming to you from my apartment in Brooklyn, New York. I want to thank the Boston Consulting Group for making today's conversations possible, and I want to welcome our audiences joining us live from Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, LinkedIn, and Axios.com. Follow along with today's event by using the event hashtag Axios Events and following Axios on Twitter. So today's event, over the next 45 minutes, will take you through how the coronavirus has upended the modern workplace and set the tone for decades to come, and how leaders can optimize their strategy to succeed in this new world. My first guest is the CEO of MassMutual, Roger Crandall, who's joining me from his home in West Hartford, Connecticut. Welcome, Roger.
Hello, good to see you.
Great to have you here. So I want to start with kind of the question that everybody has for a company, as big and as influential as yours. You started off in person, like almost every other American company. Now you're 95% remote. Take me back to March to April, to that switch, how that happened, and where you are now.
Yeah, so it really was like flicking a switch for us. We have some operations in Asia, so we'd seen what had happened there, so that we have been thinking about what we would do if the pandemic came to the U.S., but it came much more quickly. So we made the decision really on a Wednesday and told everybody this was going to be the last week at work. We made sure that people had equipment at home. At that point, I had no idea how long it would be, although the first all-employee call I had, someone asked me, and I said, it could easily be after July 4th. And everyone went, July 4th, it's so far away. And here we are, of course, in October, still working remotely, trying to make sure that, our employees are safe, but also that they're able to take care of their families. Certainly childcare and how the school systems are working on a hybrid or virtual model is a big factor for us in thinking about how we can make sure our families can work the way they need to as well.
So, over these last 6 or 7 months, we've flitted from companies saying, this is working great, I could be remote forever, to let's go back, I can't wait to be back. I want to ask you, will MassMutual ever go back to what normal was before all of this? And if not, where do you think you'll end up in terms of remote versus in person?
Yeah, it's a great question. And there's some days I say, we could work like this, quote unquote, forever. And there are other days I say, gosh, I can't wait to get back in and see everybody. But so I think on some level, there's going to be some hybrid model going on. First, I think this has opened everybody's eyes up as to how you can work virtually, and particularly for managers who weren't comfortable or used to working with remote and distributed workers. It's required them to come up the curve on that. Certainly, there's some folks who working remotely works very well for them. But I'm really concerned about the lack of collaboration. It's on the one hand easy to reach out to anybody, but you miss that last 10% of communication that is so important that happens in person. I'm worried about what it means for culture over time, particularly for younger workers. If you have people who are deep into their career that have worked together for years, working remotely is not as hard. We had interns this summer who never came into the office, and it is just not the same. So I'm looking forward to it being safe to bring our employees back. We're not going to force anybody to go back into the office. And I imagine we're going to have some type of a hybrid model going forward, at least initially. Certainly access to public transportation in New York and Boston is absolutely critical. And as I said before, the schools working in person so that people know where their children are going to be is really critical as well. So my guess is we're pretty deep into 2021 before all that happens, because it's going to require a vaccine that's widely available and widely used. So we're going to be working on a more virtual basis than we ever thought, for longer than we thought.
Mm-hmm. And I want to talk about this idea of collaboration and, the things that we're missing. One question that I've had covering companies throughout all of this is, it's clear a company can function remote, but I'm not quite sure yet whether a company can innovate and grow all remote. Tell me about what MassMutual has done over the last 6-7 months. Have you felt like you've been able to move forward as a company, or have you kind of been stuck at where you were in March?
I think we had a little period where we were, I'm not going to say a deer in the headlights, but we just wanted to make sure everything was working. But we are absolutely moving forward as a company right now. And I'll give you a great example of innovation and the use of technology, we had a program called LifeBridge where we provided free life insurance for lower income Americans, and we pivoted that and changed it to a program we call HealthBridge, and we've now insured almost 8,000 people for almost $175 million, giving them free life insurance for frontline healthcare workers. We started it in our home states of Massachusetts and Connecticut, and we've now rolled it out across the country. That was done entirely from a work from home virtual environment. So it is absolutely possible to innovate, but is it easier to innovate in person? I think it is. Plus, I think people just feel better being able to be with other people, or most people do at least. So I'm really proud that our company is continuing to move forward. Our life insurance sales are actually up year to date. People, let's face it, don't normally like to think about life insurance. They don't normally like to think about mortality, but seeing it on the news every day, the industry has seen more applications for life insurance come in. And that's a really positive thing because so many American families are underinsured. So we've been able to move forward, but I know I'm certainly looking forward to being in the office with my colleagues again as we can safely do it.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit more about HealthBridge. I mean, you said it yourself. It's very essential to this moment. What exactly is the program doing it, and why is now the time for MassMutual to launch something like this?
Yeah, so first, we had the ability to launch it in a completely digital platform. So MassMutual, as the name implies, is a mutual company, which means we don't have stockholders. We're effectively owned by our policyholder members. And we have been since we were started way back in 1851 in Springfield, Massachusetts. We're still headquartered in Springfield. And what started with 31 people pooling some money and talking to friends and neighbors, we've now got over 5 million friends and neighbors across the U.S. So it's really kind of amazing. So we've been investing heavily in technology because the business, frankly, is not as efficient as it could be, and it's just not as easy to work with. The process of fully underwritten life insurance is still in many ways an older process. So that investment really paid off with this ability to bring this product out. And what it is it's literally a free, no strings attached 3-year life insurance policy for healthcare workers. Anyone who works effectively broadly in healthcare is eligible. And we thought it was a great time to do it because we all know that, especially in the early days of the crisis, when it was very intense in New York and in Boston in particular, the frontline healthcare workers were really bearing the brunt of caring for us, but also the risk of getting the virus itself. So we wanted to do something that was very much aligned with our purpose, bringing financial security to all Americans. And doing it in a way that people could get access without having to meet with someone in person or have a paramed come into their home. So we're super excited about it and hope to continue to grow it.
And, on this topic of values and company purpose, I want to switch gears a little bit to another position you hold, which is that you sit on the Business Roundtable, which is a national business leadership group, obviously. And one really key thing that the Business Roundtable did last August, was come out with this statement saying, profits aren't it for businesses anymore. It's about values too. It's about communities. And, right after that statement, we're now in the biggest global health crisis we've seen in our lifetime. And this idea of companies having a bigger purpose is bigger than ever. How is MassMutual kind of living up to that August promise? And how are you active in your community?
Yeah, it's a great question. And again, for MassMutual, it's always been easy to talk about business having a higher purpose. So for us, our employees, our communities, our policyholders have always been critical. And a great example, it's just launching right now, is we're very active in CEOs for Racial Equity. So this is a group that literally has just launched, led by PwC, and I'm very proud that MassMutual is a founding member. In fact, my former chief of staff is the chief operating officer of the organization, P.F. Flanagan, because we think business has a real role to play in helping, frankly, A, bring the country together, and B, just make our country a better place for everybody. So we see the racial injustice going on in the country. We see the division in the country. We think business has to do something about it. So I'm really proud that MassMutual is very actively involved in that effort. We've actually have 6 fellows that we've committed to the organization for a 2-year period. And the objective there is to have the business community come together to try to find actual solutions to these problems. HealthBridge, I mentioned. I firmly believe it starts with taking care of your own employees. We offered all of our employees an additional 80 hours, 2 full weeks of paid time off for anything COVID related. And that was a very broad definition. Like if it was helping take care of your children, helping take care of your parents, if you just needed some time because you were getting pulled in a lot of directions at once. We wanted people to make sure that they had that time. And then we've also been very active both in Springfield and in Boston and around the country, supporting a variety of organizations focusing on COVID. So this is a continuation of MassMutual's mission, the way we look at it. And I'm really pleased to see the vast majority of large companies thinking the same way today.
And you mentioned, taking care of your own employees being a big part of that promise. As we know, no one expected to be home this long. Parents are suffering. There's a lot of people, myself included, who live with roommates and didn't think that we were all going to be working at home on top of each other for a whole summer. People are definitely starting to feel the burnout. What are you doing in terms of just the messaging you're releasing to your employees to make sure people stay motivated and head into 2021 feeling like they, can do this for a little bit longer and feel good at work?
Yeah, I think one thing that's great is we are a company with a purpose. We help people secure their future and protect the ones they love. We have from the first policy we wrote back in 1851, and the policies we're writing today, the same thing. Our policyholders can be with us as long as 80 or 90 years. I actually just got a letter from a policyholder who had written me when he turned 98, and then when he turned 100, and wrote me again, turning 102. He's been with us almost 85 years as a policyholder. So it's such a long-term business. It's kind of amazing. But with respect to our own folks, again, a little extra time is absolutely critical. But just remind each other, a little kindness goes a long way in the world. And be kind to yourself, be kind to others, and make sure that you take the time you need it. No one knows how to live through this environment. It hasn't been one for 100 years, a pandemic like this. So I think it's really important to take those short breaks. I very much encourage our folks to make sure when you take vacation and time off, put the devices down, focus on your families and yourself, because we can plug back into this world, as you know, so many times, so many ways. And I think a little rest is a great thing.
And the last thing I want to ask you, Roger, is what has been your biggest surprise working from home? Either a fun one or a sad one.
Well, I'll tell you, my dogs are lobbying heavily for me never to go back to the office because they now are used to a lot more walks, and so that has certainly been a fun one. I think the other surprise has been just how versatile our people are. We have such a great group of people. They care about what they do. They care about each other. To pick everybody up and move them from home and keep everything working smoothly was a really big effort. And then to kind of continue it going. So I've always been proud of our people, but boy, I'm really proud of our people in this environment today.
Thank you so much, Roger, for your time.
Thank you very much. Appreciate being here today.
And now I want to turn it over to Axios' Chief People Officer, Dominique Taylor, for a view from the top segment with Managing Director and Senior Partner at Boston Consulting Group, Luke Potocznik.
Thank you, Erica. And joining me from New York today is Luke Potocznik, a Managing Director and Senior Partner at the Boston Consulting Group. Thank you to the Boston Consulting Group for sponsoring this event, and thank you, Luke, for joining me today.
Delighted to be here, Dominique.
Excellent. So, Luke, you're an organizational transformation expert, and I assume that when you're working with companies and CEOs, it's because they want or need to undertake some sort of change. But this pandemic has forced every organization into some sort of state of transformation, whether they wanted it or not. So what's your perspective on what's happening right now?
Yeah, no, I think that's right, Dominique. I think whether you look around, there's been a massive acceleration of trends that were already existing in the market. So I think you look at things like online penetration, look at the grocery sector. Prior to COVID, it was, 3% online. In the last, 5+ months, it's gone almost to 10% online. Everyone thought that would happen, but they thought it would take place in 5 years versus 5 months. And so that's been a massive disruption that companies are looking at, even leading companies. And then, of course, there's all the changes in behavior and ways of working that weren't even contemplated 6 months ago that companies are now looking at. And I think the leaders are looking at and saying, how do we use this to our advantage? How do we think about how we work differently and use that as a strategic advantage versus our competitors?
And a lot of companies, I think, feel like things are out of control right now, that they're on their heels reacting to this moment. How can companies find those opportunities and feel like they're taking back control of this moment?
No, I think that that's a correct characterization as well. And I think the first thing is to get your cost base and your capital structure and your liquidity right. And I think the companies that are getting on offense have really looked at their cost base in a zero-based way and said, how do we think about our organization differently? How do we think about our cost base differently? And how do we use the funds that we can unlock to really invest in some of the opportunities that we see in the market? And so I think it's leveraging that funding from inside the organization to fund top line growth is where companies are getting back on offense.
And that sounds actually very similar to what we did here at Axios. We're a younger, smaller organization, so it was easier, I'd say, for us to pivot pretty seamlessly in this moment. But how can larger, more mature organizations ensure that they move quickly and undertake some of those things?
Well, I think large organizations have been looking at smaller organizations for a while, and really, the ability to make decisions fast, to really look across the organization and understand how decisions interrelate, and then also create the ownership within the organization. And so, I've seen many clients using a couple techniques to do that. One is, appointing chief transformation officers, oftentimes reporting to the CEO, that have the ability to look across the organization and help to make decisions quickly and understand how those actually impact other parts of the organization. So that's one move that I've seen organizations make. Another that I've seen large organizations make is appointing some of their senior leaders and their most distinguished leaders, typically not on the leadership team, typically one level below, as investment category owners. So they own a particular investment category within the organization horizontally. It may be digital, it may be marketing, it may be sales, and their job is, for part of their time, is to really reimagine and challenge the way the organization does that and bring that different point of view. And so I think that that's allowing organizations to work fast, but also challenge themselves from within.
And how can it sounds like those are some of the ways organizations can embrace transformation as more of a mantra than a one-time event. What are other ways that companies can weave in this embrace of transformation into their everyday work?
Well, look, I think it's right. I would say that transformation is no longer an event. Really, it needs to be an ongoing capability. I think if you looked at the S&P 500 in the 1960s, the average age of a company listing there was 60 years. Today it's less than 30, and over the next 10 years, it's expected to go to less than 15. And so I think organizations that are able to challenge themselves from within, with this investment category structure, with a chief transformation officer type structure, looking at the external ecosystem and partners to really challenge them, is a way that companies can really look to transform their business.
And then you mentioned at the beginning a number of ways that trends have accelerated or things that have emerged during this time. What trends do you think are here to stay? And then what do you think are the ones that will just fade away when we hopefully emerge from this pandemic?
Well, look, I think the trends that were really an acceleration of ongoing trends, so things where the curve has really gotten bent up to be, more of an acceleration, are here to stay. Things like online penetration, where it was already in the market. There was a long-standing belief that trend was going to increase penetration. I think those types of things are here to stay, and they've just accelerated, and organizations are in the process of trying to adapt to that. I think that, the ones that are around new behaviors, obviously, I don't expect that we'll all be working from home forever. That said, in recent surveys that we've done, 60% of employees say they want some type of flexibility moving forward, and 75% would say they're equally productive at home, as they are in the office. And so, I think leading companies are also looking at some of these changes and, saying, well, how do we actually make this a strategic for us? So, for instance, can we shrink our footprint by 50%, 70%? Some of my clients are considering fairly radical moves where they say, look, what if we really rethink what the role of the office is, and use that to fund additional growth investments in the business. And so I think that, outside of those existing trends, some of these new behaviors will endure, but they'll endure for strategic reasons, and they'll endure for reasons that, help companies attract and retain talent.
Excellent. And those are all top of mind for us here at Axios right now, for sure. So thank you, Luke. These are very worthy insights into how companies can shift in this moment and really emerge from this difficult time stronger than ever. I appreciate you joining us today, and I will turn it back to my colleague, Erica.
Thank you so much, Dominique. And our next guest is Senior Vice President and Chief Customer Officer at the Clorox company, Troy Datcher, who's joining me today from Oakland, California. Welcome, Troy.
Thank you, Erica. Great to be here.
So, Troy, Clorox has had a crazy year. I'm looking here, sales in the cleaning category jumped 33% year over year. Stock price has risen 40%. Harris Poll, which does a ranking of America's most trusted companies, did one this year, and Clorox got the top spot. You have a new CEO in Linda Rendell. And just like anecdotally, finding Clorox wipes back in March and now is like winning the lottery, as the New York Times put it this week. It's become such an iconic part of what the American experience has been these last 6 months. And I would love for you to just take me to the war room back in March when this all hit and you realized, as the executive team of Clorox, that this was going to be a big, big moment for the company.
Well, Erica, first, thank you for the opportunity to connect. And before I jump into your answer, I want to take a moment to just really recognize the really challenging time that a lot of Americans and candidly folks around the world are facing right now because of the pandemic. We're thinking about you. Clorox is working really hard to make sure that we're delivering products when consumers need it the most. And I want to thank our 8,800 employees for all the great work and the sprinting they've done since March to deliver as much product to the marketplace as possible during this time of need. But to answer your question, it was a war room. It was a great description. I recall that day. I don't think I ever forget it throughout the rest of my career. I walked into that floor and on our cleaning division's floor inside the executive offices. And what I saw there was a room full of employees, cross-functional team of product supply, marketing, and sales. Their laptops open, people scribbling on whiteboards, and we're trying to figure out how to get as much product out into the marketplace as possible, as soon as possible. And that took a lot of internal collaboration, but importantly, it took collaboration with our retail partners. I lead the sales organization for Clorox. I spent a lot of time talking to retailers about simplifying our supply chain to make sure that we could get as much product to the marketplace as possible. And I don't think many people know this, Erica, but we manufacture over 450 cleaning items before the pandemic, and today we produce 45. And we're doing that to make sure we get as much output as possible into the marketplace. So your war room description is a great one. It's one we've taken virtually, and we've been working nonstop since March to make sure that we serve consumers when they need us the most.
So what you're saying is you've kind of whittled down your focus to focus on just the most important stuff and make sure that's on the shelves.
Absolutely. And so we first and foremost looked at those items that provided disinfecting properties that would obviously help during this time of the pandemic and with the challenges that the virus is presenting. And so we first and foremost led through that lens. Also making sure that we took care of healthcare. We have a significant business in healthcare, so we are supplying hospitals and clinics with disinfecting products as well, but we knew that disinfecting was essential at this time, and we focused our energy and efforts there.
So, talk to me a little bit about your supply chain, because obviously things flew off the shelves in the beginning of the summer, but even still, it's still such a great joy to get your hands on a box of wipes. I still rip my wipes in half to make sure I can make them last, and they still are flying off the shelves in big cities and all around the world. How are you managing that supply chain? How are you bolstering it to make sure that, you aren't out of stock in these big stores?
Well, in addition to streamlining our operations and partnering with retailers to make sure that we're getting efficient on the total supply chain, we've expanded our investment in capital to make sure that we're cranking out as much product as possible, and also partnering with third-party companies to add to our supply chain to build capacity. So throughout our supply chain, we're leaning on partners to make sure that we're efficiently building a supply chain network that can deliver against this really unprecedented demand that we're seeing in the marketplace.
So Troy, you told me you've been at Clorox for 20 years, and this is obviously a moment like no other. And beyond just being a company that, due to its nature, finds itself at the center of this pandemic, it's also a big American company with a big workforce that has changed, just like all workforces have changed. Do you see yourself going back to a normal after this, or has the way Clorox does things changed forever?
Well, I think today's example, me doing this interview from Oakland and we're doing it remotely versus me sitting in an office with you, is a great example of the fact that we are doing things differently today. I've actually benefited from sitting in my office here in Oakland, connecting with my teammates on a more frequent basis, because I'm not flying around the country to do that. I'm connected with more customers every day and having conversations around partnership in a more convenient way than ever before. And I like to think that when things get back to normal, whatever that is, Erica, I think there's going to be a mix of the old and the new. We'll still yearn to get together and have conversations around a partnership and building relationships, but we'll leverage technology in more ways than we ever thought before. And so I think you're going to have a little bit of both. So will it go back to normal? I think we are living a new normal. We can all say that. And there'll be a lot of great things from this experience that I think we'll definitely put into place to make us a more effective, efficient organization.
And, a lot of companies have taken this moment to just kind of make sure that they are treading water, staying afloat. Clorox is one of those that has had to rise to the occasion, that has had to grow during this pandemic. What are some of the innovations and new things that you've seen come up over the summer or even earlier in the fall that you think have been great growth opportunities for the company that make you proud?
Well, first, we're very fortunate that we've built brands that consumers love, and we've been rewarded for that. If you look at our sales numbers, as you and I talked earlier, it's a vote of confidence that we have brands that consumers trust. And that obviously in cleaning, disinfecting, we know the story there, but we're experiencing tremendous growth in other segments of our portfolio, like with brands like Hidden Valley and Kingsford Charcoal, as consumers or people, cook at home today versus going out for dinners. And so we're seeing a impact across our portfolio. But to answer your question regarding innovation, we have invested significantly in partnerships to extend our equities out into the world beyond the four walls of your home. You probably heard some news around partnerships with folks like United Airlines, Uber, and AMC Theaters to give confidence to people as they leave their homes and go out into communities, as we go back to some sense of normalcy, that they can step out with confidence that Clorox is helping to provide a safer environment for them to be in. So there's a lot of innovation in that space through partnerships, and we look forward to continuing that as we open up the country and get back to normal.
Absolutely. And, amid a crazy time for the company as is, I mentioned when we first started talking in September, you got a new CEO. What's that transition been like? I'm sure, you're working quite closely with her.
Well, Linda Rendell, our new CEO, has been in place for 3 weeks now. But Linda's no stranger to Clorox. She's been around for 17 years. I've had the fortunate opportunity to work with Linda throughout my career. And I can tell you one thing about Linda, she's a great judge of talent. She put me in this role a year and a half ago. So I'd say she's first and foremost, she's a great judge of talent, but she's also been the architect behind our new strategy, Ignite. So she's no stranger to the challenges that we're facing as an industry and the opportunity that we've been presented with as a Clorox organization. She's a proven leader with a tremendous track record, and we're really excited that she's going to be leading the organization for the foreseeable future. I'm a big fan of Linda's, and I'm so thrilled that she's leading us during this challenging time.
And for yourself too, in a big leadership position at the company, what has it been like managing remote teams and hybrid teams? And what are the strategies you use to make sure collaboration is there, innovation is there, and creativity is there?
Well, I'm learning a lot, but I'll tell you, one of the keys to my success is that I was out meeting with our teams. I had a really good sense of the pulse of the organization because I was touching people. But that was taking a lot of travel and energy for me, flying from city to city. I can tell you, I'm touching more people today from my office here in Oakland than ever before. So one of the things I'm doing is making sure that I'm checking in on my team, carving out time in the day to reach out to those folks who are really spending a lot of time and energy making sure that we're delivering against the promise of delivering great products to consumers when they need us the most. We have a group of essential workers within Clorox, folks that are in our plants and facilities all around the world who are working 24/7 to make sure that we get as much product in the marketplace as possible. And it's my job, as along with the rest of the executive committee, to make sure that we're checking in on our teams, to make sure that they know that we appreciate their efforts, and make sure that they're taking time to recharge and be ready for the next battle the next day.
Troy, you started our conversation just by acknowledging the incredible pain and suffering the pandemic has dealt to millions, all Americans. And I want to ask you sort of what's one thing that gives you hope coming out of this from where you sit, both as a business leader and as a citizen?
Well, we've faced challenges as a country many times before, and what's really key is bringing community together with government, with ordinary people every day. And on the other side of this, we always end up in a much better place. So I have a lot of faith, a lot of hope, a lot of optimism that what we've done in the past will be true in the future. We'll work together and we'll be better because of it.
And I want to ask you one last thing. I've been asking everyone, what is your biggest surprise of working from home?
That's a great question. My biggest surprise is I think I want another home. I think after staring at the same four walls for the last 31 weeks, I think it's time to move. I love my home, but I think I want just a different a view of things. So I hate moving, but this has probably prompted me to take a look around.
Yeah, speaking to you from my New York City apartment, which is teeny tiny, I completely relate to that. Thank you so much for your time, Troy.
No, thank you. We appreciate the opportunity.
Our final guest is Hill Ferguson, who is the CEO of the telehealth company Doctor on Demand. He's joining me from San Francisco, California. Welcome, Hill, and thanks for being here.
Good to be here, Erica.
So, Hill, one thing that I find super interesting about Doctor on Demand is that while most CEOs I talk to think about March or even April as when this became real for them, for you, the coronavirus and the pandemic were on your mind much before that, and you were already thinking about what's this going to look like. When exactly did it first cross your wires, and take me back to that moment?
Sure. Well, we were tracking the coronavirus in January and all through February, largely to understand what impact it would have on patient demand of our service. Typically, in the February to March time of the year, we're coming off our peak flu season, and demand starts to taper off through the summer months and then pick back up in the fall. And so we were primarily trying to gauge how many doctors do we need to have on staff to make sure we can meet demand if this coronavirus were to land in the U.S. and start community spreading? And so we were working closely with the CDC in February. We developed a health assessment that patients could use for free to try to determine what level of risk they might have to the virus. And we started using that as a way to really cope with what became an onslaught of demand in March. And so we were ready for it in many ways and not ready for it in others. But it's such a key thing to our business and how we operate that we were on it pretty early.
And those summer months that were supposed to be a dip in demand, you saw unprecedented demand. Take me to that, that part of the year, and then sort of what were the numbers you saw there? What sort of surge did you have to deal with?
Right. So big surge in end of March and April. We doubled our provider workforce, or our doctors that treat patients. That's normally the time of the year, as I was saying, that we're expecting volume to be coming off. So it was in many ways we were building up, right at the time where we had been planning to roll off. And so we had a peak in April, and then it came back down a little bit in May, and then started to run back up all through the summer. So we had another peak in July, and things just seem to sort of level off through most of the fall, as we're now into what would normally be a typical cold and flu. We're not seeing as much of that anymore because most people are indoor social distancing, trying to take precautions against the coronavirus, and so we're trying to see what impact that will have on cold and flu this year.
So we're living in this sort of stay-at-home economy now, and just like e-commerce, just like remote work, telehealth was one of those things that we knew was coming in the future, but the pandemic has surely accelerated the adoption of it. How much quicker do you think that timeline has been moved forward? And what sort of a future do you see for your industry in 2022, 2023, and beyond?
It's pulled our industry forward by a number of years. Just the overall patient demand has pulled in at least 2 or 3 years, and then the overall acceptance and acknowledgement of the broader healthcare ecosystem has probably accelerated 5 to 10 years. So I would say that what's happened has been far more than just the coronavirus. The whole industry has changed. Everything from reimbursements, paying providers for telemedicine in places where that wasn't possible, lowering interstate licensing laws that was prohibiting patients from treating patients over interstate boundaries has been relaxed. Patients are now aware of telemedicine at much higher rates than they were before. And so if you go back to December of 2019, only about 10% of Americans had ever taken a telemedicine visit. That same study was done in the summer of 2020, and it was about 50%. So just massive increases of adoption over a relatively short period of time.
Right. I mean, that's a great way of thinking about it. Just like online shopping, telemedicine is something that you didn't really think about until you had to, and then it becomes this great convenient option that is potentially life-saving. What sort of consumer and customer sentiment have you noticed? Are people starting to change their attitudes? What are the ways in which their trust in telemedicine has grown?
Right. Well, before the pandemic, telemedicine was generally seen as a convenient option to see a doctor when you couldn't go see your regular doctor. And so now, with everyone being used to living in a pandemic where staying indoors, social distancing is sort of the norm, using telemedicine to get care has become the norm. And so we're treating a lot more of everything. We have patients coming to be seen for maybe their diabetic condition or a mental health issue. We've got massive amounts of depression and anxiety and stress in our workforces and in our populations, like record levels of mental illness that we're dealing with today too. So it's really across the board as far as normalizing telemedicine across your healthcare needs in ways that was never really present before.
And do you think there are certain types of care that will kind of move online in a bigger way for the foreseeable future? I'm thinking about what you're saying about mental health. Experts have said that staying at home, the burnout, the isolation could cause another, simultaneous pandemic alongside coronavirus, the pandemic of anxiety and of mental health. Could that be a realm that moves online, more permanently in the future, and could that affect costs?
Mental health, for sure. We were seeing strong growth coming into the pandemic with our mental health practice. It's only going to continue. I think the medium, with it mostly being talk therapy, obviously we have psychiatrists as well, so if medications are involved, that's a component too, but the medium of virtual care is really an excellent fit for mental illness. Most people feel more comfortable talking to a therapist from their home, not having to go out into an office environment where you might be uncomfortable in a different setting. These things could actually improve the clinical experience for mental health. When it comes to physical health, I think what the industry is learning is much more can be treated virtually than was assumed before. So you hear a very common refrain among physicians who, before the pandemic, may have dismissed virtual care as being substandard to being in an office, whereas many now are saying, wow, I've been doing a lot of telehealth visits really out of necessity, and I'm blown away by how good they can be. And so I think there's just a general realization that all the things we used to believe about patient care aren't always true. There are certain things that will always be better in person, and there are certain things that are obviously you can't do with virtual care. But I think the opportunity for the industry is to take this learning and to try to make sure that we're using virtual care as a medium for every condition that can be used for that condition, and then really reserving our brick and mortar capacity, which is expensive, but should also be saved for real emergencies and real cases where in-person care is really required. We can better harmonize the supply and the demand and better balance the costs associated with delivering healthcare in America.
So one big sign that telehealth truly is the way of the future, like you're saying, is you had a fundraise over the summer, $75 million, and I'm sure Doctor on Demand is growing and innovating alongside this pandemic. What are sort of the coolest new things happening at your company that you want to tell us about?
Well, one of the things that we did really quickly was we really jumped on CMS's decision to reimburse for Medicare for telemedicine, becoming the first telemedicine company to start treating our nation's seniors. And so that was something that I'm really proud of, that effort. That's been rolled out for a couple of months now. We're working on enabling multi-party visits to occur. So if you're a caregiver of someone, being able to help your mom get care from across the country and collaborate remotely, features like that. We've really brought on a lot of additional providers into our practice. So building up the supply of caregivers on our platform, as well as a handful of things that I can't quite share just yet, but that we'll be rolling out here in the coming months that we're really excited about.
And I want to talk to you a little bit about just the way your company operates. Right now we're in a moment where remote work is the norm. We will have some kind of in-person in the future, but most people want to have some sort of a hybrid model. You've been, running on this hybrid model since before the pandemic began, working with doctors all over the country. What advice do you have for CEOs that are transitioning from in-person to hybrid on how to make that really work for them?
I think it's really important to understand your workforce and to really understand their needs. I mean, we're in an incredibly competitive environment as employers, as CEOs of companies. You want to have the best and brightest people coming to work for you. So understanding what their needs are is critical. We've done a number of surveys throughout the pandemic of our people to really understand what they're dealing with, what challenges they're having, how many of them actually want to come back to a physical workspace when this is all behind us, and how many of them want to continue working remotely. And so I think just having a constant pulse on what your people are dealing with as an employer, recognizing that there are some things that you can do to help alleviate that is really a key piece to it. So one of the things that I've learned is that most everyone in our company wants to continue having the flexibility to work from home. When we reopen our offices, whenever that may be, and we have 3 office locations across the U.S., we'll try to do that with a slightly different attention on what those offices are meant to be used for. So I'll be investing more in collaboration space and meeting rooms and different, creative spaces where people can actually leverage the fact of being together in person can enable them to do things that maybe they're a little harder time doing remotely from home. And so rethinking the physical workspace is also top of mind. But I think just really understanding your employees, what they need to be successful and what they're looking for out of their life is really a key piece of advice I would offer.
Right. It seems like taking the pulse of your workforce regularly is super key here. And last question for you, Hill, before we sign off. I would love to know what your personal biggest surprise working from home has been in these last few months or 6 months.
Well, it's been surprising on a number of levels. I think I never really imagined how great it would be to eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner with my family. I've got 3 kids and my wife here under this one roof. I'm surprised at what everyone prefers to eat during those meals that I never knew before. I think that the probably one of the more surprising things is how much I've actually enjoyed it. I never would have picked myself as a person who really preferred to work from home, and I am looking forward to going back into an office. But I'll have to say, I plan on working more from home when this is all over.
Ending on a good note. Thank you so much, Hill, for your time and joining us from California.
Thank you, Erica.
Thank you all for joining us for another virtual event, which hopefully made you smarter, faster on the topic of the changing workplace. I also want to thank the Boston Consulting Group for making today's event possible. And I want to invite you to follow along for the latest news at Axios.com or on the Axios app. Before you leave, I do want to share with you what's next for Axios. In the coming months, we will be expanding into local news in markets all over the country to bring you the essential news on what's happening where you live. To hear about our local news endeavor, visit Axios.com/local. That's it for me, and stay tuned for our next virtual event tomorrow at 12:30 p.m. Eastern on how social and racial inequities are being exacerbated in the American healthcare system. Thank you and good afternoon.